And tonight's event is framed future-facing parking and mobility strategies. And it's really come about thinking about that often the developments that are being designed and that are gaining planning consent at the moment and that are being built aren't actually very future-facing. So we are actually almost building something that sometimes when we discuss in these forums seems out of date already. And whether there are a lot of reasons to talk about parking, and I bet everybody loves talking about parking. But tonight is really about some of the strategic elements and why a traditional approach to parking can really prevent us from addressing climate change, health and well-being. And also it kind of undermines our ability to adapt as things change in the future. So a lot of our developments that are currently being planned or built really rely on a very traditional approach, kind of parking on plots, either between buildings or integral garages. But that allows us, that kind of is actually a very restrictive kind of design parameter and doesn't allow us to create the places that we need to create to address these 3 points. Traditional parking models do not encourage a modal shift. And they also don't allow us to change travel behaviors. We have done a little bit of an exercise internally and actually quite surprised that currently parking takes up more space than housing. And we are in a housing crisis, so something is going wrong there. And this is an assessment of a very traditional suburban housing model. Wouldn't it be lovely if we can create that and use that space that we are currently using for parking to create additional landscape, additional areas for ecology and biodiversity, additional play areas, really kind of improve the quality of our neighborhoods. But the kind of more suburban models or the more traditional models of parking also prevent us from building more compact developments, and therefore prevents us often from walking and cycling. So we know that less active lifestyles have a negative effect on our physical health. But studies have also shown that less compact urban developments have a negative impact on our mental health, because more compact developments create actually more social interaction and a sense of community. So in a roundabout way, the traditional ways of parking not just prevents us from living healthier lives, it also kind of, it undermines our physical and our mental health, and also prevents us meeting a climate change aspect. So the suburban form and traditional parking models, when we use them, we are kind of hardwiring in a kind of a lifestyle that is not up to date. And it also prevents us from actually getting the benefits from a reduced car ownership. And we have statistics, we have lots of research that shows that in the future, people, and particularly the younger generations, actually have less cars. But with these kind of traditional parking models, they hardwire in a lifestyle. So for example, if we have a semi-detached house with a bit of parking next to it, those spaces, we can't bring them back into really good use. They're not much use for that particular house because they don't actually create a nicer garden space or bigger garden space. We can't bring them into the public realm or create them, make them into ecology areas. So we are really kind of, when we build these developments, we've kind of lost it. We've lost the opportunity to create the change. And I want to kind of rehearse some of the examples from Germany, and a lot of people talk about it here as well. I mean, there's references to car barns or remote parking or consolidating parking. And these two diagrams, they really illustrate how parking could be accommodated differently. and actually without having to reduce parking standards. So we can still meet parking standards. We just have to think about parking differently by locating it in particular locations, for example, in these examples at the periphery of the developments and the neighborhoods. The top example shows how people can still drive to their front door. They can kind of unload or pick up their children, and do everything you would need to do when you have your car kind of right outside your house, but you're not allowed to park there. So the cars are not part of the day-to-day environment. The cars have to go then to the dedicated parking spaces. And that's the example that is used in Freiburg-Vauban, an example you probably all know about. The bottom example is a bit more radical, where all the cars are kept on the periphery and you can't actually drive to your house either. That also relies then on communal refuse collection, etc., etc. But it also really motivates people to pick up the bike instead of the car, because as you can see in the picture, the bike is right in front of your door, the car is kind of a minute walk away. So all those elements have proven to encourage people to drive less, and also led to reduced car ownership. And they also kind of allow us to create better, greener environments, safer environments for the people who live in these developments. And as I said, we don't have to necessarily reduce parking standards. And also in the future, when those car ownership goes down, we can convert those parking places into green space, into public spaces, into play areas, or develop more housing on them. So they're flexible approaches, and we can adapt to our lifestyle changes. So the question is then, why are we not actually delivering this? And often I sit in meetings and, there is the master developer, the landowner says, great idea, let's do that. There is a local planning authority and the planners, they say, great, let's do that. There's a highway authority that says, good approach, let's try and do it. But often then it comes like, is it market facing? Will the market deliver this? Will people buy these houses if they don't have their parking space in front of them, etc., etc.? But then there have been studies in the past, and admittedly, the numbers or what I'm quoting now is quite an old study, and I would welcome anybody to get in touch if you have new data. But that study done by the RIBA quite a few years ago showed that 3/4 of people do not want a home that sits in a volume house builder estate. So that should suggest there's a customer base for something else. But I understand that doing something different, pushing boundaries, doing something untested, that is risky. There is commercial risk. And studies have shown in Germany that people are attracted to car-free or reduced or different car parking approaches when there is a kind of a real benefit in terms of the environment. So if they can clearly see that because there's a different approach to car parking, for example, or transport or mobility, they're getting a greener, a safer, a more attractive environment. And that is really the carrot. So I've only raised one particular challenge, the commercial risk. I'm sure that in this conversation, there will be loads more risks and challenges identified, but I hope there will be also some solutions and some positive lessons learned, so that together we can hopefully find a way of actually starting to build and deliver some of those developments tomorrow, so we see them coming out of the ground. So we don't seem to be building something that is already out of date. So, but that's enough from me. We will have hopefully a really good debate later on.